Emotion. The polygraph test was designed as a kind of lie detector test in the early 19,000s. The idea was that lying would produce different physiological reactions from telling the truth. This was false because there is no specific unique physiological reaction associated with lying versus telling the truth. It is like how we feel frightened versus angry. In both cases, the heart rate might increase, breathing rate might increase, pupils can dilate. While it may be useful tool to convince suspects to confess to their crimes, people believe that it does work, but it really only detects the physiological correlates of emotion in general and not lying in specific, and it is not admissible as evidence of guilt or innocence in courtroom in India. Thus, the test is based on the idea that when a person experiences an emotion, there is a physiological reaction. Hence, it is not reliable. Emotions have three components: a physiological reaction to a stimulus, a behavioral response, and a subjective feeling. Two terms that are often used to describe the physiology and feeling dimensions of emotions are arousal, the level of excitement, and valence, whether the subjective feeling is positive or negative. However, there is no universal definition of emotion. Qualities of emotion, that they are embodied, that is, you feel them, they're uniquely recognizable, that is, they're associated with characteristic facial expressions and behavior, they're triggered by emotionally salient stimuli which are highly relevant for the well-being and survival of the observer, and they can be triggered without warning as well. They're usually not susceptible to our intentions. They have global effects on virtually all other aspects of cognition. Emotions fall under the umbrella term of affect, which includes not only the discrete emotions that have relatively short duration, but also more diffuse, long lasting states such as chronic stress and mood. A mood is a long lasting, diffuse affective state that is characterized by low intensity, enduring feelings, often without an identifiable object or trigger, and can affect a person's experience and behavior. Moods do not have well defined neurohormonal or physiological substrate, and the neural correlates of different moods are still poorly understood. Culturally, we have such different forms of facial expressions. Useless. Maybe. Keltner and Ekman, they believe that there are widespread agreement across culture when it comes to facial expressions. However, isolated non-illiterate groups did not agree, recognizing expression of surprise and disgust. Charles Darwin was the first to theorize that emotions were a product of evolution and therefore they were universal. While Cosmodis and Tooby suggested that adaptive emotions are adaptive and could have developed through natural selection. They suggest that emotions are broad motivational programs that coordinate various responses to solve specific adaptive programs, including maintaining cooperative relations with the other members of your group, choosing a mate, find food, etc. Exactly when and where and how an emotion is expressed may be determined by the culture. Display rules that can vary from culture to culture, learned ways of controlling display of emotions in social settings. For example, Japanese people have strict social rules about showing emotion in public. They simply do not show emotion, remaining cool, calm, and collected, at least on the outside. Display rules may differ across gender. Researchers have focused on three primary categories of emotion. Basic emotion is a set of emotions, each with unique characteristics, carved by evolution and reflected through facial expressions like anger. Complex emotion is a combination of basic emotion, some of which may be socially or culturally learned, that can be identified as evolved, long lasting feelings such as jealousy, and dimensional theories of emotions is categorizing emotions as reactions that vary along the continuum rather than as discrete states. Ekman's criteria for basic emotions: it has rapid onset and it is for brief duration. Basic emotion: if a relevant stimulus is present, it will trigger innate, universal, short lasting change in behavior. These are basic emotions. There are six basic human facial expressions. Tracy and Matsumoto provided evidence that pride and shame to the rank of basic emotions. All of the So, among the contestants, some were congenitally blind. The body language of their behavioral response was not learned culturally, but it was observed that all of the contestants displayed prototypical expressions of pride upon winning. Fear at the amygdala. The amygdala, which is located at the anterior medial portion of the temporal lobe, is the key structure in the mediation of fear. Monkeys with lesion amygdala have Clover-Bussey syndrome. They show lack of fear. Before the surgery, the monkeys had typically reacted with hostility and fear to humans. After the surgery, they showed little or no excitement when the humans handled them, nor did they show fear when presented with a snake, a strong aversive stimulus for a typical rhesus monkey. Similarly, a patient SM who had bilateral destruction of the amygdala but preserved hippocampus exhibited a lack of consciousness and distrust and had deficit in fear processing. She had no motor or sensory impairment or no notable deficits in intelligence, memory, or language function. Patients with brain damage outside the anterior MTL and patient SM rated the intensity of emotions in a series of facial expression. They could recognize everything except fear. Fear and the amygdala. Amygdala is a critical brain region for triggering a state of fear in response to encounters with the threatening stimuli in the external environment. Another hypothesis suggests that the role of amygdala is more general. It is involved in determining what a stimulus is and what is to be done about it. Hence, it is involved with attention, perception, value representation, and decision making. However, there are two ways to reaching the amygdala. One is the low road, which is through the thalamus. Here, the fear responses which bypass conscious processing and allows for immediate reaction to fearful stimuli. However, there is a high road where the information goes from the sensory cortex to the hippocampus to the amygdala. Here, it allows processing that is slower, conscious, fine grained, and integrated with high level cognitive processes such as memory. Amygdala is critical for fear conditioning. The prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate offer an additional level of fear conditioning, that is, observational fear learning, in which fear of potentially harmful stimuli is learned through social transmission. An individual can learn to fear scorpions by observing signs of fear and pain in others without personally experiencing a scorpion attack. Understanding love. There is no universal expression for romantic love. We do observe behavioral signs of love such as kissing and hand holding, but this can be faked. Independent of love. Love recruits a distributed network involving reward, motivational, emotional, and cognitive systems. This reinforces the assumption that love is more complex than a basic emotion. No activation of the amygdala has been reported in fMRI studies, whereas amygdala activation has been noted for lust. Passionate love activates a specific network localized within the subcortical areas and also within the high order brain areas, sustaining cognitive functions such as self representation, attention, and social cognition. The reported length of time in love and intensity correlated with the activation in many regions, such as the right insular cortex, right anterior cingulate cortex, bilateral posterior cingulate cortices, and the caudate.